Steve, thanks so much for joining us with this project. It's greatly appreciated. You've got years of experience, hence we've decided to put you into the spotlight, quite literally. Let's start off with one of the important issues and something that really does happen a lot in local government, and that is people seeking to run for local government essentially on a single issue ticket. And it's understandable, they see something wrong in community, but what are some of the socially and even politically dangerous aspects of that sort of approach to a campaign?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Pleasure to be here. You could run it across a number of frames, I suppose, that response. Pragmatically, one of the issues with being a single issue candidate is that the role of the council is so broad. So the council has 100 different services where you're expected as a councillor to be involved and engaged and consider the whole community on all of those services. So one of the real risks of being a single issue candidate or councillor is that you render yourself irrelevant on all of those other topics because it's a huge time constraint. I think the other topic is that again, pragmatically, it's not a great way to be elected typically, because unless there's a groundswell of support for your particular issue, you've got to find a way to get people to vote for you. And, you know, people are looking for credible candidates for trust when they're casting their ballot. So really, that sort of begs a question for the electorate, is what's in it for them?
There is, of course, the need when you are elected that you're going to be talking and discussing and arguing about a broad range of topics. There is, I believe, there's a lack of understanding of really what local government is. And we hear the hoary old statement, roads, rates and rubbish. Now, that may be some of the foundational elements of local council, but it's significantly more than that. So here's an impossible question for you. Give us a nutshell view of what is local council responsible for?
Yeah, thanks, because I think we just talked about the fact there's 100 different services. The really quick answer, Charles, is that the council is responsible for delivering its council plan. So every year, one of the first tasks of the new council is to involve itself on delivery of this 4-year plan. And that planning framework's being extended out, which is around what's the sort of community that the council in its 4-year life wants to build. And it'll be around health and wellbeing, community connections, the maintenance of assets, the built environment, the management of a sustainable organisation. So in that sense, I think what's really important for anyone standing for council or thinking of standing for council is understand the way that the council does its business. At that highly theoretical level, the council plan will roll into the annual budget and then will roll into service delivery. So being really alert to the way that that business is transacted is just vitally important for anyone who wants to make a difference once they get there.
How could potential candidates find out about the council plans? Are they available typically online? Do they have to apply for them? But that would give a good overview of what's actually involved, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And the council plans by law must be on the website of the council. So Googling council plan and the name of your council will enable you to pull up that document really easily. One of the dangers about a council plan, particularly for the uninitiated, is often they don't say much. They might say, we're going to encourage welfare, or say we're going to encourage a healthier community. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to provide sporting facilities. There might be particular service interventions that they're going to make, but it doesn't get down to that budget level. And that's why a sort of a more ingrained understanding of how the council plan informs the annual budget is really important.
The reality of our government system at all 3 levels, well really 4 levels because you can't forget territories as well, but federal, state, territory and local, is that it's based on a very white system. It is the Westminster system that was brought over and landed on this country with a thud. So drawing on your years of experience, what are the sorts of culture shocks that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and other people who come from other cultures might encounter when they enter into this very white system of government?
Oh, look, in some ways, Charles, it may well even start at the start of a meeting, because many councils will still start their meeting with a Christian prayer. Some councils have now moved to also doing an acknowledgement of country. But so the framing of a lot of meetings in the start is, as you say, very much based on that Westminster system. It's a little bit more organic in local government in that it's not quite defined in the way that federal and state are, but it's still there. And so there is that understanding that, you know, the council officers through the CEO will provide reports to the council, then the council gets to consider them. Now, that's where we're sort of drifting away a little from that very theoretical council plan, because you get into that kind of mix between the good policy and the politics of what's going on at the time. Now, the good news is that we've got, you know, meetings, local laws or procedures for how meetings should be conducted. But also the reality is, though, that in highly politicised issues, it can be pretty robust and even, you know, bordering on quite nasty. So in some councils, So again, at a principled level, yes, we're aiming for the best behaviour, but sometimes the politics really do cause, you know, a need for a high level of resilience for those that are involved, and call on people to bring out their best behaviour.
A lot of people, when they enter into local government, have one or two causes, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but they're passionate about one or two particular things, whether it's the environment or whether it's for greater diversity or greater opportunities for multicultural employment or LGBTQ issues, whatever that may be. In reality, how much power and influence can a candidate who is elected expect to have? I know they seem, or they want to be agents for change, but in reality...
It's like one of those movies, Charles, where, you know, those sort of political movies where ultimately you've got to have the numbers. So it's fine and it's terrific to be an advocate, but ultimately advocacy is about bringing people with you, because if you don't have the numbers, you don't get the decision that you want. To the extent I've thought about this, one of the real, I think, issues that anyone who is an advocate needs to think about is, how do you create an environment where the others in the room or the wider community don't see that they're giving something up by acknowledging your position or adopting your policy or allocating resources in a particular way, that in fact what we're doing is something for the greater good. And in fact that's where the council plan fits, because finding the synergies, if you like, with a range of projects for the greater good can be the art, and also taking the time, because these aren't things, you know, getting change doesn't happen in weeks or months. It can take several years or longer. And so being smart about the way that negotiations happen is really important.
It does also touch on the subject of conflicts of interest. And this is something that a lot of people who go into local government don't fully comprehend when they go in. They may be a member of an organisation and they are seeking to champion that particular cause. And they leave themselves wide open to all sorts of strife. And we've seen this time and time again, right across the country, at all levels of government. Can we have a bit of an overview on what is a conflict of interest, the two different types of conflict of interest, and what are some of the possible repercussions?
Right. So the Local Government Act's been changed to supposedly simplify conflicts of interest. It used to be quite prescriptive in terms of, you know, if you're on the board, then it's a conflict, whereas now it doesn't say that, as you've said. So conflicts of interest are in two categories: a direct conflict, if you like, where, and my typical explainer of that would be, is there money involved, or is there something of value associated with the decision that would cause someone to say that you are going to benefit or disbenefit someone as a result. And that actually might include board membership of a club or association that you're involved with, for example. You know, you're on the board, there's a decision being made about that organisation. That would be a conflict of interest that requires you to remove yourself from the chamber. The other one's a general conflict of interest, where a reasonable person would think there's a reasonable prospect that your decision might be biased. Now, in the case of a counsellor, that's a really tough one, because for a counsellor, of course, counsellors are going to be actively involved and very familiar with clubs and associations and groups of people in their organisation. You know, that's in the nature of representation. So just because you've got friends or you're familiar doesn't necessarily tip over the line in terms of what's a conflict of interest. It will become really interesting, or it's more significant, or most significant, for example, though, where there's a decision under an Act of Parliament, say with a planning permit, where you've got a close connection that someone might say you haven't brought an open mind to that discussion. That's one of the ones to look out for. One of the real risks with this whole conflict of interest conversation, Charles, with the new Local Government Act is it's never been tested. So we've got this general framework, there is this grey space, and some things are really clear. And it's also important that, of course, we've got conflicts of interest because we know people. So because we've got friends and relatives and we're connected in communities, from time to time conflicts of interest do arise. What's the most important thing is that people put their hands up and test whether in fact it's enough to get them out, to move them out of the decision making, and that they act on that. The worst thing people can do is stay there when they should be out.
Well, Steve, we've looked at some fairly serious sides of being a local councillor and running for local government. What, though, are some of the benefits of actually being a counsellor and being an agent for change?
Yeah. Charles, look, councils do great work in their communities. Then I keep coming back to this fact there's 100 different services at least that most councils run. They're big change agents in their own communities. One of the joys of being on council is that there are seldom silver bullets, and public policy is hard. So public policy is around choices that are made, getting the best result with limited resources. Being involved in those decisions and thinking more broadly about issues is a real personal growth opportunity. Local government gives you the opportunity just to meet some really terrific people in government and in your community and see the world through a completely different perspective. Look, for anyone that's got a civic mind and thinking about sort of growing themselves and making a contribution, think hard about standing for your local council. It's a great thing to do.
Well, running for office, running a campaign, when do you start? When is it too late? When is it too early?
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that question, Charles, but what people tell me, because I've always been a council officer, there's no formula, but the earlier the better, the more well-researched you are, the better. But the other part of it is people can't do it alone. You know, does your family and your wider community support your candidacy? Have you done your research? Are you sort of really clear-eyed about what it will be like when you get on council? Because, you know, there's a lot to achieve, but there's also some obstacles. So it's never too early to do your homework. And my sense of it is all of those little things like read the council plan, read the budget, go to a couple of council meetings, which you can now do online, decide whether it's for you. If not, that's okay. There might be other people that you know that could be tapped on the shoulder, or maybe next time around. But the more people that are involved and understand how the system works, the better candidates we'll get and the better outcomes for our communities.
And I know that was going to be the last question, but I promise this is the last question. It's a 4-year solid commitment, isn't it? You don't just go in there, seek to achieve one goal and then walk away. It's solid 4 years, that's it.
And a lot of councillors will tell you after 4 years they're tired. You know, yeah. This is, it is a solid commitment. It's 20 or 30 hours a week for most, and some will say more. It's reading over the weekends. It is a solid commitment. So that research and being ready for the role is really important.
Steve Cooper, thank you so much for joining us here on the YCCC video broadcast.
Good to talk, Charles.